They didn't ask his name, didn't check the calendar, just saw a black man in first class and assumed he didn't belong. Seat 2A. Window. Leather soft enough to forget the world. He didn't forget. He watched. Straight spine. Loosened tie. A worn briefcase was tucked beneath the seat like it had something to say. Boarding was still in motion. A woman in pearls hovered beside him. Checked her boarding pass. Looked again. "You're in my seat," she said. He looked up. Didn't argue. Didn't smile. Just slid the stub from his pocket. 2A. She blinked. "Oh," she muttered, then stepped back, cheeks coloring, eyes scanning for someone who might agree with her anyway. No one did. He looked away. Out the window. Not in the sky. At the gate. At the workers in orange vests who moved like pieces in a system too large to fail, until it does. The seat beside him filled. A man. Mid-40s. Loud cologne. Softer spine. Said nothing, but sat like the row was his. The black man in 2A didn't flinch. Didn't shift. Just breathed. A stewardess approached. Blonde. Ponytail is too tight to move. Paused when she saw him. Then continued. 3 minutes later, she returned. "No carte. No trae. Just a clipboard." "Excuse me," she said, voice wrapped in airline sweetness. "Can I see your ticket again?" He gave it. She studied it for too long, then forced a smile. Must have been a system glitch. He didn't ask what she meant. She didn't explain. She turned away before she had to. The engines hummed to life. The cabin dimmed. Another attendant passed with water. Skipped 2A. He didn't look up. Didn't reach. Didn't complain. Just waited. A voice overhead. "Ladies and gentlemen, flight time to Denver will be 2 hours and 23 minutes. He wasn't going to Denver. And he wasn't listening. He was counting. Watching. Not the minutes. The moments. The missed greetings. The measured glances. The little things that say everything. He didn't need to be seen. That wasn't the point. He was here to see them. To see how they treated the one person in the room with no label. No camera. No entouraje. Just skin and silence. He reached into his jacket. Pulled out a single page. Folded once. Edge sharp. On it. Observation report. Internal audit. Norjet Air personnel. Flight 722. JFK to Denver. Focus. First class. He slid it back into the pocket, then placed both hands on his lap. Steady. Still. The seatbelt light blinked on. Across the aisle, someone whispered something that sounded like security. He heard it. Didn't move. Because the story wasn't starting now. It already had. And no one in the cabin knew. They were writing it. The seatbelt sign had just gone dark. A child kicked the seat behind him. Twice. Then stopped. Not because the parents said anything, but because the man in 2A turned and looked once. Just once. Calm. Silent. Enough. The air settled. Then the voice came. "Excuse me, sir. I'm going to have to ask you to step into the galley with me for a moment." A male flight attendant this time. Early 30s. Tanskin. Shave head. Nervous hands. He didn't wait for an answer, just gestured. People turned. Eyes hovered. Pretended not to stare. The man in 2A looked at him. He didn't stand. Didn't blink. "Is there an issue with my seat?" he asked. "No, sir. It's just a routine check. Won't take a moment." "Routine." "Yes, sir." He nodded and stood. Unhurried. The cabin watched without watching. He followed the attendant down the narrow aisle, past the curtain, into the galley. The door clicked behind them. The noise softened. Now it was just two men, and the hum of altitude. The attendant lowered his voice. "Sir, I apologize. It's just that a passenger had some concerns." "What kind of concerns?" "They weren't sure you were supposed to be in that seat." He raised an eyebrow. "I showed my ticket. Twice." "Yes, I know. It's just that you weren't on the pre-board manifest." "Because I wasn't pre-boarded." The attendant hesitated. "They thought you might be a threat." That word hung. He didn't flinch. Didn't smile. Just asked, "Did they say that?" "Exactly." The attendant didn't answer. Didn't have to. The silence said enough. He glanced at the wall. The emergency kit. The fire extinguisher. The intercom. Then back to the man who still hadn't said his name. "What would you like me to do?" the man in 2A asked. The attendant hesitated, then handed him a paper cup. "Would you like some water?" It was an olive branch and a distraction all at once. He took it. Didn't drink. Just held it. You've done your job, he said. You can return to the cabin. The attendant looked unsure. Sir, I'm not here to cause a scene. He stepped past him, back through the curtain, back into the seats, back to 2A. No one said a word, but they all felt it. The shift, the realization that maybe, just maybe, they weren't in control of the story anymore. He sat, placed the cup down carefully, and looked out the window. But he wasn't watching clouds. He was watching patterns. Because this wasn't about a seat, it was about a system. And it had just flagged itself. The flight settled into that fragile quiet. Engines steady. Seat backs reclined. Screens glowing with half-watched sitcoms and muted weather updates. The man in 2A hadn't moved since returning from the galley. His posture remained deliberate. Still, he hadn't touched the water. He hadn't closed his eyes. He watched, not just people, patterns. From the corner of his eye, he saw her approach. Mid-50s, blonde bob, pearl earrings. A magazine was still folded under one arm like armor. She wore wealth like a skin, tight and polished. Her steps were careful but purposeful, like someone who had spent a lifetime making her discomfort everyone else's problem. She leaned slightly into the aisle, just enough to press 2 fingers on the shoulder of the male flight attendant. "Excuse me," she said, hushed but clear. "I'm sorry to bother you, but—" He turned, a neutral smile ready. "I don't feel entirely comfortable with that gentleman being in first class." The attendant blinked. "I'm sorry." She nodded, tilting her head subtly toward 2A. "I'm sure he's perfectly nice, but he's been watched. And he doesn't really look like he belongs here." Her voice was soft, smooth, the kind of tone that thought it was polite because it didn't scream. But it cut just the same. The attendant didn't respond immediately. His training told him to de-escalate. His instinct told him she was serious. His eyes flicked briefly toward 2A, then back. "He's a confirmed passenger, ma'am." "Are you sure?" she asked. "Because I didn't see him come in with the rest of us. And he hasn't spoken to anyone. And the way he just stares." The man in 2A didn't react, didn't turn, but he heard every word. The quiet wasn't thick anymore. It was sharp. Every syllable from her mouth sliced through the cabin and into the silence like a needle through skin. The woman paused. "Maybe just check again. Quietly. Just in case." The attendant gave a rehearsed nod. "I'll let the captain know." She smiled, pleased. "Thank you." She walked back to her seat with the air of someone who had saved the plane. As if prejudice, when whispered, became patriotism. He waited a full minute after she left before he moved. Reached into the inner pocket of his coat. Pulled out a small silver pen. Clicked it once. The recording paused. He'd caught everything. Not just the words. The timing. The silence. The glances. This wasn't a scene. It was data. He looked out the window. Denver is still hours away. But for him, the landing had already started. One passenger just failed the empathy test. Another would fail the accountability test before touchdown. And him? He would fail no one. But he would write every failure down. He clicked the pen again, began a new track. This time his eyes scanned the crew. The ones who said nothing. The ones who looked down. The ones who chose comfort over courage. They didn't know this flight was being evaluated. They didn't know he wasn't just there to observe. He was there to judge. And his reports didn't go to HR. They went to the top. 20 minutes passed. Maybe less. Maybe more. Time had taken on a different weight inside the cabin. Conversations thinned. Beverage carts rolled back to the galley. Eyes drifted to windows, seat backs, or nowhere at all. But in the space behind curtain 1, things were moving. 2 flight attendants stood shoulder to shoulder, backs turned from the cabin. One of them, the man from earlier, held a tablet. The other, a woman in her 40s with a tight bun and tighter voice, whispered with purpose. "He's not on the priority manifest." "He had a valid ticket," he replied, too quickly. "But he didn't board with the group. He wasn't scanned at pre-check. That's protocol." The man hesitated. His voice dropped. "I think he might be someone we don't want to flag." The woman narrowed her eyes. "Someone who's going to file a lawsuit? Someone who's going to file a report?" That stopped her. Briefly. "Do you want to escalate this, or fix it quietly?" "I'm not the one escalating." She crossed her arms. "Let's get the cockpit involved." Quietly. The curtain rustled, then stilled. Above them, The call panel lit amber. A message blinked into the first officer's console. To a identity mismatch. Verify with base. The captain didn't answer right away. He read it once. Then again. He'd seen things like this before. Random passengers flagged. Usually nothing. But this one made him feel watched, and he didn't like the feeling of being watched by someone who hadn't introduced himself. As for ID, he said finally, to no one in particular. Do it quietly. Back in the galley, the attendant received the update. His hands were less nervous this time, more resigned. He stepped out from behind the curtain. His eyes went straight to 2A, but the man was already looking at him. No smile, no expression, just presence. The attendant paused mid-aisle. Something in his chest told him not to speak. The man in 2A didn't break eye contact. Then, without raising his voice, without changing his tone, he said 4 words. You've just been recorded. It wasn't a threat. It was a timestamp. The attendant blinked. The blood in his face retreated. Sir, I was just following instructions. The man finished for him. I know. He reached into his coat again. Not for the pen this time. For the black card with silver trim. No logos. No numbers. Just one line. Authorized Oversight Agent. JCA, Internal Compliance. He didn't hand it over. He just placed it on the tray table. The flight attendant stared at it like it might detonate. From the corner of the cabin, 2 passengers were watching now. One of them, seat 3B, pulled out a phone. Not to record, just to hold. The way people do when they feel something is about to matter. The man in 2A leaned back. The pen was still in his pocket, still recording. The card was still on a tray, still shining. But what struck the attendant hardest was the look in his eyes. Not angry, not smug, just prepared. Prepared for what came next, which, if anyone had been counting, had already begun 3 moves ago. The cockpit was calm, dials steady, lights green, altitude smooth. But the captain's jaw had locked into something tighter than his headset. He sat there, thumb hovering over the comm switch. The message was still glowing on the screen. To a identity mismatch. Verify with base. He tapped the channel open. Norjet Ops, this is Flight 722, requesting confirmation on a passenger in first. C2A, name unavailable. Possible discrepancy with manifest. A beat of silence. Then hold. The line went dead for 37 seconds. Long enough for the silence to become more than silence. Then came the voice. Male. Older. Crisp. This is command verification. Captain Neely, Flight 722, he said, sitting straighter. We've got a passenger seated in 2A. He wasn't logged in pre-board. We've had behavior reports. Unusual boarding. He presented a black JCA credential. Another pause. Not as long. Just enough to let doubt start dripping through the seal. Describe the credential, the voice said. Black, no logo. Silver lettering. Reads Authorized Oversight Agent, JCA Internal Compliance. No barcode. No photo. A breath. Then the voice changed. Softer. Sharper. If he's on your plane, the man said, you should be asking him who you are. The line went dead. No goodbye. No confirmation. Just that. Neely didn't move. Didn't speak. The headset slipped from his ear and hung around his neck like a verdict. Beside him, the co-pilot said nothing, but his fingers stilled above the navigation display. Back in first class, the air had changed. Passengers didn't know why, but they could feel it. It was the way the attendants moved, slower, less sure. It was the way no one dared to touch the intercom anymore. It was the way the man in 2A became not just present, but central. He hadn't moved, hadn't spoken again. The card still rested on his tray. The pen still recording. A passenger across the aisle coughed, as if to break something. But nothing broke. The attendant returned, slower than before. He didn't speak, just picked up the card. Not to verify it, just to return it. He didn't look at the man's face. Just said, barely audible, "May I offer you a drink, sir?" The man didn't look up, didn't say yes. Just nodded. Something passed between them. Not forgiveness, not understanding, just awareness. Awareness of weight. Of what it meant to be seen, truly seen, and still doubted. The drink came in a glass. Not plastic. No one else got one. He took a sip. It was warm. He let it burn. Let's settle. Because that was the moment the test ended. Not the whole flight. Just the part they thought was private. Everything after this was public, even if no one realized it yet. Even if the story hadn't left the plane, it had already left their control. And in a few hours, the world would see what it looks like when judgment sits quietly in seat 2A. It started with a whisper, or rather, a tap. The kind that barely made a sound but meant everything. Seat 3B. A woman in her early 30s. Casual blazer. Bluetooth headphones hung around her neck. She hadn't said a word all flight, but now she tapped her screen once. Zoomed. Framed the moment she had been quietly watching. The flight attendant had just picked up the black card from 2A's tray table. He hadn't read it. Hadn't scanned it. He just returned it with a hand that moved like it wanted to disappear. The woman in 3B recorded that moment. Just that. No commentary. No voiceover. Just silent footage. The tension in the attendant's shoulder. The stillness of the man in 2A. The card. The nod. The wait. 10 seconds. That was all it took. She opened her messaging app. Sent it to a friend with a caption that read, "Something's going on. They're clearly ignoring this black man in first. Is this protocol?" Her friend shared it. They shared it again. No one knew what exactly they were watching, but it felt wrong. And that was enough. Back in the cabin, no one had spoken to the man in 2A. Not the crew, not the passengers. But now, they were glancing more often, holding eye contact just a little longer. Then, looking away just a little faster. Something had shifted again. This time, it wasn't the authority. It was perception. The man in 2A hadn't moved. He had nothing to react to. Because this wasn't new. He'd seen it before. The way silence turns into suspense. The way we're just doing our job becomes we might have done something wrong. He didn't celebrate the moment. He recorded it. The pen was still on. The card was back in his pocket. The drink is untouched. He looked out the window. Not in the clouds. At the reflection. His own face superimposed on the endless white. A reminder, not of who he was, but what they still refused to see. Up front, the captain was reading something on his tablet. He didn't show it to the co-pilot, but his eyes didn't leave the screen for a long time. It was a message from ground control. A link. Someone had posted the clip. No name, just a caption. "This is first class." The post was gaining traction. The captain didn't speak, but the co-pilot noticed his hand clench once, then steady again. Flight 722 was beginning its descent, but the story had just taken off. Seat 3B looked down at her phone. 5 notifications. 20 shares. A stranger had already commented. "That's Ellis Braxton. Isn't he with federal oversight?" Her thumbs paused. She looked up toward 2A. The man still hadn't looked at her. Still hadn't spoken. Still hadn't blinked. She looked back at the screen. Then typed 3 words. "This changes everything." And hit post. The descent was smooth. Mechanical. Predictable. Unlike the mood in the crew galley. The tablet buzzed again. Another update. This one is not from operations, but from public relations. The flight supervisor opened the message, read it twice, and said nothing. The flight attendant with the shaved head stood nearby. He had stopped pretending to rearrange service trays. He was just listening now. Listening and waiting. At the front of the plane, the captain adjusted his earpiece. "Repeat that." The voice from ground control came back. Strained, clipped. "There's press at the gate, sir." And someone from internal compliance. "We advise standard boarding, but ask that 2A be discreetly escorted." "For optics." "Optics." He said it like the word had dirt in it. The co-pilot leaned in. "Is this about the video?" The captain didn't answer. The man in 2A had already put away his pen. The card was gone. The glass still full. He had folded his coat over his lap like someone preparing for a funeral. Not his own, but someone else's. He wasn't watching anymore. He was remembering. The silence before a hearing. The breath before a verdict. The moment right before a system realizes it just stepped on its own tail. Back in row 3, the woman with the phone was watching him. This time, openly. She wasn't the only one. A man in 1C had refreshed his feed 4 times. A couple behind them had put away their headphones. Not to sleep, just to hear more clearly. The shift was no longer invisible. It had form, weight, heat. The aircraft touched down with the gentleness of practiced hands. The landing gear whispered across the runway. The brakes hummed. A collective breath was held. Then exhaled. Seatbelt signs pinged off. The cabin lights brightened. No one moved. The man in 2A reached slowly for his coat. Not rushed. Not forced. Just calm. A voice cracked over the intercom. One of the crew. We'd like to ask passengers to remain seated momentarily due to a quick check at the gate. No one asked why. They already knew. Outside the window, 3 uniformed personnel stood near the jet bridge. Not police. Not federal. Not a visible authority. But present enough to make people nervous. A woman in a navy blazer stepped forward. Badge clipped. Phone in hand. Waiting. The door hadn't opened yet, but the story had already. One attendant walked toward 2A. The younger one. He hesitated. Sir, he said gently. There's someone waiting at the gate to speak with you. I believe they're from corporate. The man in 2A looked up for the first time in minutes. I know. The attendant swallowed. They want to apologize. He gave a small nod. Not an agreement. Of expectation. They will. The attendant blinked. They will apologize to the story, not to me. The curtain opened. The door clicked. The jet bridge connected. And for the first time on that flight, the man in 2A stood on his own terms. Not because he was told to, not because he had to, because the flight was over. But the consequences were about to begin. She was waiting just beyond the gate. Dark navy suit. Subtle gold earrings. Hair smoothed back into the kind of bun that said she didn't expect to be surprised. Her smile was already there, calm, curated, practiced. The name badge on her lapel read Janet Price, Norjet Public Affairs. She didn't offer a handshake. Smart move. Colonel Braxton, she asked, low and smooth. He didn't correct her. Didn't answer. He just stepped off the jet bridge and paused. Not for effect. For confirmation. 2 airport security staff lingered at a respectable distance. One held a clipboard, the other a radio. Neither made eye contact. Price cleared her throat. We've set aside a space for a quick debrief, if you're willing. Just through here. She gestured down a hallway that wasn't marked. No saini. Just a door with a keypad lock and a card reader. He followed. Not because he trusted her. Because he had already walked this hallway month before, in a different suit, during a quiet weekend, when Norjet's compliance team didn't know they were being tested. The door opened into a muted lounge. No lobos. No windows. Just beige walls and cold light. There were 2 chairs, a small table, 1 chilled bottle of water, unopened, 1 digital voice recorder tucked under a brochure. He sat. So did she. The silence was professional. Not awkward. Practiced. Weaponized. First, let me say how sorry we are for what occurred on Flight 722, she began. We understand that situations like these are sensitive, and we take them seriously. He said nothing. She took that as permission. There was clearly a breakdown in communication, she continued. And while I can't speak to every individual action, we are conducting a full review. He raised an eyebrow, barely. You're conducting the review? She hesitated. I'm in our internal oversight division. That would be Department 4C, currently directed by Martin Yao. Her face twitched. Barely. The kind of flicker people make when they realize the person across from them isn't who they thought or hoped he was. I'm familiar with your process, he added. I wrote the original protocols. She straightened. The smile didn't disappear. It just stopped meaning anything. If this is an evaluation, Mr. Braxton. It's not. Her breath caught slightly. This is the post-evaluation conversation. He placed a black folder on the table. It made no sound, but it carried weight. Price looked at it like it might open itself. You recorded the flight? She asked. No. A pause. I recorded the culture. That stopped her. She reached, slowly, for the bottle of water, then thought better of it. I assume there are expectations? She asked. He nodded. There are standards. And if those standards haven't been met, then we reassign responsibility. Not blame. Not punishment. Just responsibility. That word rang differently when spoken by someone who didn't need a title to carry it. Price reached for her tablet. He didn't stop her. It didn't matter what she typed. He had already filed the report, and what happened next wouldn't be decided in this room. It had already started leaking into inboxes. Policy chains. Oversight boards. Regulators. Her voice was steadier now, but smaller. And you? What about me? Will you be giving a public statement? He looked at the wall behind her. Blank. Soundproofed. No. She looked surprised, then relieved, then confused. I won't need to, he said. Your system already gave it to me. The clip had made it to the evening broadcast. It played without a voiceover. Just raw footage. A man in a tailored coat, sitting still in 2A, receiving a glass of water no one else got. A flight attendant, unsure, returns a card with both hands. A cabin, watching but not speaking. The caption read, "Who gets to belong at 30,000 feet?" News anchors didn't editorialize. They didn't need to. The silence spoke louder than anything else. And across the country, viewers leaned in, not for drama, but for something far rarer, recognition. Not of the man, of the pattern. At Norjet headquarters, phones lit up. Legal teams activated. Statement drafts stacked like sandbags. But Braxton wasn't there. He wasn't on camera. He wasn't checking reactions. He was in a different building. Older. Federal. 6 floors of marble and quiet power. The kind of place where change rarely started, but always had to pass through. The Office of Federal Aviation Oversight. 3rd floor conference wing. Frosted glass. Polished table. 12 seats. He entered without announcement. One member, an older woman with silver-rimmed glasses, stood as a reflex. No one else did. He didn't sit. He placed a manila envelope in the center of the table. It didn't spill open. It didn't need to. Everyone knew what was inside. The chairman cleared his throat. Colonel Braxton, we've reviewed the footage. Braxton said nothing. We're aware of Norjet's actions and other reaction to your presence on Flight 722. Still nothing. The chairman shifted. Was this sanctioned? Braxton finally spoke. No. The room held its breath. It was necessary. Someone at the far end asked, "What exactly do you want us to do, Colonel?" He looked up. No heat in his eyes. Just clarity. I don't want you to react. I want you to remember. A pause. Because this isn't new. What you saw wasn't a policy failure. It was policy fulfillment. That's what makes it worse. The room stiffened. You've had reports, he continued. Surveys. Complaints. You've had data. But you never had a mirror. He tapped the envelope. That's what this is. A man in a Navy suit leaned forward. Are you suggesting structural reform? I'm suggesting honesty. Silence again. Then Braxton asked the only question that mattered. How long have you all known this was normal? No one answered. Not because they didn't know, but because they did. One woman looked down. Another folded her arms. A third adjusted his tie, even though it wasn't crooked. He didn't need their approval. He needed their awareness. He gave them exactly 10 seconds, then reached into his coat and pulled out the pen. Clicked it once. Everything after this, he said, is the real test. And left. No press. No handshake. No quote. Just a man walking down a hallway. No one else wanted to walk first. The office was exactly as he left it. No lights. No noise. Just the faint hum of recycled air and the soft weight of old walls. The kind of quiet that didn't ask for attention. It earned it. He stepped in, closed the door behind him, didn't turn on the overhead light, just reached for the small desk lamp by the window. The warm cone of amber landed on the only thing that ever mattered in this room, the work. His desk was clean. 2 pens, 1 notebook, a folder labeled closed cases. None of it was needed tonight. He opened the laptop. No password prompt. Facial recognition blinked green, like it already knew. The screen loaded to a page he hadn't opened. He didn't need to. The algorithm brought it to him. Hashtag #C2, it was trending. Not because of outrage. Not because of a single video. But because people had started using it. Posting. Commenting. Not just about Flight 722, but about airports in Detroit, in Atlanta, in Tulsa, in LAX. People who had stood in lines longer than they should have. Been asked to explain my presence more than once. Been told to wait, to step aside, to prove. A teacher in Baltimore wrote, I wasn't in 2A. I was in 24D. But I know that silence. I've worn it like a coat. A father in Dallas wrote, they checked my son's boarding pass 3 times. Mine only once. He's 10. A nurse in Phoenix wrote, I work security. I see the pattern. I've been the pattern. I am Sore. He read every line, not because he had to, because he could. No alerts from Norjet, no messages from federal boards, no calendarimbites, just stories. And something else, emails. The inbox had swollen, from double digits to 4,000 and rising. Some of the passengers, some of the crew, some anonymous, some not. All of them in the same way. Now I understand. He leaned back in the chair, closed his eyes, not in rest, in recognition. The flight had ended. The storm had moved on, but the weather pattern had changed. That's what happens when a system meets someone it can't erase. Someone who doesn't fight back, just watches, waits, and records. Not for evidence, for memory, for culture, for history. The pen was still in his coat pocket, still full. He didn't need to use it anymore. Not tonight, because the last part of the test had nothing to do with him. It was what people would do after seeing what they didn't want to see. And tonight they were looking, not away, but toward. And in their silence, something new was starting to speak. Some stories end when the plane lands. Others don't even begin until the door opens. But the ones that matter most, they stay with you. Not because of what was said, but because of what was ignored, what was passed over, what was silently permitted. He didn't raise his voice, didn't demand attention, didn't play the part they expected. He just sat, watched, and let the truth do what it always does, expose everything that thought it was hidden. So the next time you see someone like him, still calm, unmoved in the face of quiet dismissal, ask yourself, is it their silence that unsettles you? Or what does it reveal about yours? If this story stayed with you, even for just a moment, consider subscribing to Story Precious, where we tell the kind of stories that don't just end, they echo.